Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting by teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, and I'm also the owner of New You Nutrition Counseling, where we believe that you can reach any of your healthcare goals at just about any body size. So, if you are ready to let go of the toxic cycle that is trying to shrink and restrict and find various ways to deprive yourself rather than actually nourishing yourself, finding ways of moving your body that you love. Um, and really just kind of falling in love with your body and looking to take care of it as an expression of that rather than an expression of hating it, then you have come to the right place. We have lots of different options for you to become engaged. I will link, of course, all of my socials and my website down below. But we have lots of options of everything from one-on-one counseling to digital courses, printed materials, etc. Different kinds of stuff, different price points. So lots of good stuff on there for you. Let us know how we can support you better. And today, what I wanted to talk about, this is something that I kind of routinely make this podcast. I sometimes, put it on my social media. It's something that I kind of get asked pretty frequently. And I think a lot of people, when they hear I'm a dietitian, they think that like this is what I do and this is all I do. It's not. Surprise. Most of what I do is actually teaching you, like I do this, and that is maybe like 5 minutes of our conversation together, if that. And then the rest of it is teaching you kind of how to get there. So I'm going to walk you through how to kind of calculate what your intake goals should be. So in terms of calories, in terms of macros, we will talk very briefly about meal planning. But this is much more just kind of like an overall daily total, which good news in terms of nourishing your body, most of it is an overall daily total. Like you don't have to break it down meal by meal, snack by snack if you don't want to. That the goal is to kind of reach the daily total. And again, listen to the way I phrase that, right? The goal is to reach the daily total. The goal is not to be below the daily total. The goal is not to um, hold on, like white knuckle and restrict to like be at the daily total. The goal is to be able to get there. And honestly, in my experience, most people struggle to get there. They actually need to eat more, not less. Um, the how and the why of that is a discussion for a different time. But today we're going to be going over kind of daily totals, and then you can kind of break them down however you want. Um, and again, like I'm putting this on a free podcast, right? So, it's one of those things that this really doesn't take a lot of time for me. It doesn't take a lot of brain space for me. And most of what I do is kind of, okay, here is the goal. How do we get you there? Right. So I just want to kind of put in that slight plug as well that like, this is not what a dietitian does or what, any kind of good nutrition coach or what have you. Like they should be able to come up with these numbers in 5 minutes for you. It really does not take a lot of effort. It's the more of like, how are you going to break it up? What is that going to mean in terms of action steps, right? Like, what are you going to eat for breakfast? How many meals are you going to have? How many snacks are you going to have? What are those going to look like? How are you going to set yourself up for success in terms of grocery shopping, meal planning? Navigating social events to make sure you're doing this on a consistent basis because knowing what to do and doing it, as most of you probably know, is are two very, very different things, not just with nutrition, with anything, right? So a lot of it is kind of tapping into, okay, what are your daily habits look like? What are your routines? What responsibilities do you have? Do you work? Do you have kids? Do you like to cook? Do you hate to cook? Can you cook? Do you know how to cook? Those kinds of things. What types of foods do you like? What types of foods do you have access to? What is your budget for groceries? All of these things come into play, right? So, like, that is what a dietitian does. What a dietitian takes into account all of that. And then the kind of basically we're providing you the roadmap to get from A to B. Anybody with like a very minimalistic knowledge-based nutrition can give you the two, like where you are and where you need to go. That's A and B, but the roadmap to get there is really where the dietitian comes in. So I'm going to I say that to say, if we, um, if you're kind of looking at this, you're like, whoa, what the heck? How do I do this? Like, that's a really good time to book a discovery call. And the discovery calls, to be clear, are free. It's just a 15-20 minute conversation to kind of tell me where you're at with your nutrition, what you're looking for. And then we kind of decide together if you're a good fit. And, like I said, they're 100% free. Happy to do them, and because they're quick, we can kind of build them in there. I'm pretty widely available for those. But, and then, I can kind of talk you through about what counseling might look like for you, how many sessions, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so again, if this feels overwhelming, don't panic. There are those of us who are there to kind of help direct you through it. And kind of it may be obvious from the title, but I still want to put the disclaimer out there that we will be talking about calories, we will be talking about macros. If that is something that for you, for whatever reason, is triggering or just kind of something that you don't feel safe listening to right now, don't skip this one. That's totally fine. It is, again, it's out there because I hear it so often, and again, I think people think that this is, like, the beginning and end of what I do, and it is, oh my, it is just, like, the very tippity tippity tip of the iceberg. So the first thing you are going to do is to find a BMR calculator. So that is Bravo Mike Romeo. So BMR, it stands for basal metabolic rate. That is the number of calories that your body needs just to sustain your life on a day-to-day basis. That accounts for no really movement whatsoever. It is more just how many calories you need to keep your heart beating, keep your lungs breathing, keep your digestive tract running, etc. Your body does tons of stuff day in and day out that we never give it credit for. So that is going to be the first number that we find. And I think, again, something that surprises people more often than not is I think people think that they have to like exercise to earn their calories, that like the only calories that they burn are burned through movement or exercise. That is not true, right? Like it doesn't matter how active you are. Like even if you were very active, like I would still wager a guess that at least 60% or more, like for most people, it's at least 75% of the calories you burn in a day are just your body keeping itself alive. So that's kind of where we start. So the first thing you're going to do is calculate that basal metabolic rate or your BMR. Again, that is not the number of calories you need to eat in a day. We're going to make a lot of differences from there. But that is where we start. And when you have that number, that is a number that you never, ever, ever want to go below. Like you never want to eat less than that because what will happen is if obviously you can survive if you eat less than that, and many of you do, but what is going to happen is that your body's going to start cutting corners because it doesn't have the bare minimum. It doesn't have what it needs in a day to kind of thrive essentially. So it's going to start cutting corners, and what that ultimately results in is your metabolic rate is going to down regulate from where it is calculated to be. So the calculation obviously is going to be an estimate. That is what your BMR should be. If you are eating well below that consistently, step one is get yourself to that BMR, right? So like if your BMR is 2000 calories, say, then you should be, and let's say on average, that you eat about 1500, your number one goal, hard stop, is getting to 2000 calories because that is what your body needs to survive. That is what your metabolism needs to be healthy. So goal, and that may be kind of one big jump if you've kind of been on a restrictive diet and you're like, oh, I can just loosen the reins and that's not hard. And then it's fairly easy for you to get to 2000 calories. Great. And again, I'm just picking 2000 as like a standard number, but your BMR is going to vary widely person to person. Some people it may be 1800 calories, some people it may be 2500 calories. Like it's just going to vary. 2000 is a nice easy number for the math of the point of this podcast. But again, that's not like it could be much higher, it can be much lower. It just depends. But again, so like again, if you know that you eat well below your BMR, it may be easy for you to get there, but you may have to do it in kind of stepwise, intentional fashions. And I think that can feel kind of backwards for folks. So like, oh my gosh, like if my goal is to lose weight, I need to eat more. Again, talking with a dietitian can really help you kind of air out some of those fears, but also get like kind of grounded advice about like why this is really important for you. And kind of, looking at your whole health history and kind of the things that matter to you. The baseline is that, your metabolism isn't healthy. It's slowing down, it's cutting corners. Your body's going to break down faster under those circumstances where it's being underfed. Um, so, number one, calculate your BMR and make sure you are eating at least that much. Okay. And if you're not, then your first step is to get to that much. Now we want to kind of account for activity, right? So activity is going to that's kind of how much you're working out. So you are going to add on, and by add on, I just mean like multiply your BMR by really anywhere. For most people, it's going to be somewhere between like 1.2 to 1.4. So we're increasing our BMR by 20% or 40%. Okay. Hopefully, I did not lose you in the math. And again, if I did, book a consult call because this is even something that I can like crunch your numbers with. But in a lot of BMR calculators actually have like 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. So it's like 20, 30, 40. I would say most people, I don't increase it by 50% unless they're like a distance athlete or they're kind of, like a collegiate athlete, certainly. Those kinds of things to where they're really being pretty active multiple times per day. For most of us, even if you work out at the gym for like an hour a day, multiple days per week, I would say probably 20 to 30% is really probably the most that you need to increase. Unless, of course, your goal is weight gain, which we'll talk about in just a second. Um, so that's kind of, you're going to kind of look at your activity level and kind of decide, okay, somewhere between 20 to 40%, is where you want to increase depending on how active you are. And that's, again, that's a judgment call. So like there's lots of kind of guidance online to help you make that judgment call. But again, dietitian right here does this all the time. I'm happy to have that discussion with you at any point in time. And again, that's probably something that we could go through in a discovery call with a couple of quick questions. Um, but you're gonna kinda decide, "Okay, I'm gonna take a big BMR, multiply it by just for again, for the sake of ease, by like 20% or multiply it by 1.2." So that is going to give you what's called your maintenance goal. So if you did not want to increase your weight or decrease your weight, that's roughly the number of calories you need to maintain your current weight. Of course, many of us have goals to change our weight, right? Many of us have goals to increase our weight. Many of us have goals to decrease our weight. Um, and this is where like the internet gets super, super confusing, right? So in order to, I'm going to start with increasing and I'm going to go to decreasing. So in order to increase your weight, you need to eat more, right? You need to eat above that maintenance level calorie. So again, that's not just your BMR. You need to meet your BMR times your activity level plus some. Right. And how much the sum is this is where it gets really dicey and where it's really beneficial to work with a dietitian because there's really not like a hard and fast rule. I think like a lot of people get into like gainer supplements and things of that nature to where they think like, oh, I need to be eating like, I hear this number all the time and I don't know where it came from, but people keep thinking like, oh, I need to eat 3,000 calories a day to gain muscle. And it's like, maybe you do, but it depends what those other numbers are, right? So normally I take your BMR times your activity level. That's your maintenance calorie level. I take that maintenance calorie level and add anywhere from like 300 to 500 calories to it. So that it's going to really depend, right? So I'm just going to do like quick math in real time with you all on here. If your BMR, let's just start there, is 2,000 calories and let's say you have kind of an average activity level, we're going to multiply that by 1.2. That's 2,400 calories, right? So that's your maintenance goal. So if your goal is just to maintain your weight, then 2,400 calories is it. If you want to gain weight, I would probably say let's eat anywhere between like 2,700 to 2,900 calories. And that's kind of to see how that feels. So that's close to that 3,000 kind of benchmark that a lot of people hit. But again, if your BMR is lower than that, so like let's say your BMR is 1,800 calories, again, times 1.2, that's like just under 2,200 calories. I would say you don't need to be anywhere, 2,500, maybe 2,700. So again, it's just going to really, I don't want to get you all lost in the numbers, but it's really just going to kind of depend what those baseline numbers are for you. And then we're just adding and subtracting from there. So if you're going to If you're trying to increase your weight, we want to, take your maintenance level calorie, and then and I would also make sure that like that estimation is actually a maintenance level for you. For most people, I recommend kind of tracking that for at least 2 weeks, if not a month, and just kind of see if you consistently hit that maintenance goal, does your weight change or does it not? Because sometimes like the calculation can be wrong. Sometimes your metabolism is functioning in ways that's kind of, people have higher metabolism, slower metabolisms. And those, again, these estimations, like they're estimates. So we just don't know. So if we know that like your maintenance level is actually producing weight maintenance, then we go up to, anywhere from like 300 to 500, just depending on kind of what's realistic for you. On the flip side of that, if we're wanting to lose weight, we subtract, right? And again, I want to be abundantly clear. We're subtracting from that maintenance, which is BMR times activity level. So what that means, we are not subtracting from your BMR. Okay. We never want to go below your BMR. So again, if your BMR is 2000, we multiply that again, just for consistency, times 1.2 for your activity. So that gives us 2400. That's your maintenance level. Then we are going to subtract the same amount, right? Anywhere from like 300 to maybe 500 calories. So this is where this person may get in trouble, right? So if we were to take the 2400 maintenance calories, subtract 500 calories from it, that's going to put us at 1900. That's below our BMR. That's too low for that person. So the most that person could subtract would be about 400 calories to get them down to their BMR. That's going to be the lowest you ever go. I hope that makes sense without kind of visual representation. But so again, we're kind of just we're calculating that maintenance. So we're going to calculate the BMR, add on the activity level. That's your maintenance calories, add and subtract from there, but never go below your BMR. And I want to be clear, I think this is another thing that like you hear about on social media so often, is that like this notion of a calorie deficit. That subtracting from your maintenance, that is a calorie deficit. Like that is all that means. It just means that like we've taken the amount of calories it takes for you to maintain your current weight, and then you're subtracting, i.e. creating a deficit, right? But it is not a deficit from your BMR. We never want to go below that BMR. Um, so we have our calories, right? So let's take the person who, their BMR is 2000 calories and they want to lose weight, right? So they're going to they're going to, we know that their maintenance is 2400. They're going to kind of come in at 2000, 2100 is kind of their general goal. Well, then how do we break that down in terms of our macros, right? So macros are also something that I think gets very confused in the media, but macros are where our calories come from. So calories come from three sources. They come from protein, they come from carbs, and they come from fat. And that is like the only three things that have calories in them. Now, what types of different foods have different amounts of protein, carbs, and fat, right? So for example, chicken has mostly protein, maybe some fat, basically no carb, whereas an apple has mostly carb, probably no fat, maybe like a tiny bit of protein, right? Things like nuts or peanut butter have a decent amount of protein, a lot of fat, very little carb, unless they've got like some sugar added in or something like that. But basically, we want all three macronutrients, right? I think fat and carbs in particular have kind of been demonized in various kind of forms of diet culture, but we want all three. We need protein, we need carbs, and we need fat. And we need them kind of in very rough ratios, but again, I wanna be clear that, like, this breakdown does not have to be exact. I would say that especially I think protein is probably the most important of those 3 macronutrients, just because your body can't really make protein from something else. Between carbs and fat, it can actually convert those 2 things to each other. So if you eat more carbs than you need, but not enough fat, your body can convert the carbs to fat. Same goes for fat. If you eat too much fat, but not enough carbs, your body can convert that fat to carb. And I want to be clear too that like when we talk about fat, your body needs a certain amount of fat coming in every day just for it to use. It uses fat for a lot of things. I think when people think like, oh, if I just don't eat fat, then I won't have fat on my body. That's not true, right? I wish it was, but that's not true. Your body uses the fat that you eat to kind of create cell membranes to help protect your skin barriers. It uses it for a lot of like nerve function type things. So I mean, like the fat is actually really important to have in your diet, and to have it every day. Same goes for carbs. I think people think like carbs are just like somehow like they make you gain body fat. They don't. They really don't. They help feed your muscles, they feed your brain, they feed your liver, and like a whole bunch of other organs. So carbs are really important. And protein, a lot of people think about protein as like building muscle, which it is important for that, but it does lots of other things in your body too. So I just kind of, again, macros, just it stands for macronutrient. It is just protein, carbs, and fat. Those are what is going to give your body the calories. So we're going to start with the calorie goal and then work our way down to kind of breaking down the percentages of fats, protein, carbs that we need. So I always like to start with protein. I just think it's easiest. You can do protein kind of one of two ways. Protein should be anywhere from 25 to 35% of your overall calorie intake. So again, you can take that like number of calories that you want to consume, whether it is a surplus or a deficit or maintenance, and then basically just kind of divide that number by 35%. I want to be clear that that's going to give you your results in calories. So just to kind of give you an example, like if we're aiming for 2000 calories times 0.35, which is 35%, means we're 700 calories from protein. It does not have 700 grams of protein. Okay. It is 700 calories. From protein. And then you're just going to divide that by 4 for protein, because there's 4 calories for every gram of protein. So that is about 175 grams of protein. That is a pretty aggressive amount of protein, but it's doable. I mean, you could certainly do it. The other way, and I actually like to do this a little bit better, is to take your body weight in kilograms. Again, kilograms, not pounds. Again, there's a lie circulating on the internet somewhere that's saying like you should be doing a gram of protein per pound of body weight. That is excessive. That is absolutely excessive. The most I do is 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram. So the first thing you're going to do if you want to do it this way is divide your body weight in um roughly in half, but it's 2.2, right? So you're going to get your body weight in kilograms. So take whatever your body weighs, divide it by 2.2. So just full transparency, I weigh about 200 pounds. 200 divided by 2.2 is 90.9 pounds. So that's, or I'm sorry, 90.9 kilograms. So that is I could start with just 1 gram per kilogram, and that is about 90 grams of protein. If I wanted to go a little higher, I could multiply that 90 by 1.2. Um, which comes out roughly to like 110 grams of protein. That's probably as high as I would go for most people. If you're, certain types of athletics, going as high as 1.4 can be appropriate. But again, I wouldn't do that unless you have been given guidance by a dietitian or by a medical professional. Eating protein kind of in excess of that, kind of beyond, for long periods of time, can damage your kidneys. So we want to kind of just be cognizant of that. It's also, you're getting so many of your calories from protein that you're inevitably not going to get enough from carbs and fat. So that's just kind of where that can be problematic as well. So I always start with protein, whether you go as like a percentage or you go as kind of I like to do grams per kilogram of body weight. Personally, I just find it easier, but whatever floats your boat. It is not a gram of protein per pound of body weight. That is not true. Then I usually go next. I go to carbs, just because I think carbs are super important. I usually start off with carbs around 50% of your total intake. So it is, um, again, it's going to be a little tricky. But I think it's one of those things that kind of depends on like how active you are, what your activities are. I would say most people don't need to go below 50%. I think 50% is kind of a good average, middle of the road type of number. And then we kind of adjust from there as we need to. Um, that said, it can go as high as 65%. It can be as low as 40. So, which again, 40% carbs is still, a healthful amount. We just want to make sure that we're not compromising something else. So again, kind of going back to a person on a 2000 calorie diet, let's just say we roughly landed out at around 110, 120 grams of protein. And now we're going to do carbs. So you do 50% times 2000, that's 1000 calories from carbs. Carbs are the same calories per gram as protein. So you're just going to divide 1000 by 4. That's 250 grams of protein. Or I'm sorry, 250 grams of carbs every day. So again, that's going to be, it's going to ebb and flow a little bit. And I think it's important too to recognize that like hitting these numbers on the nose is actually pretty impossible, like every single day. It's much more, I like to give these numbers in ranges. So for example, if it's, the goal is 250, I would say frankly anywhere from 200 to 300. Like you can give it a pretty big range. And as long as you're in that range, you're fine. And your calories are pretty close to what it is too. I also like to give calories in ranges. So again, if my goal was 2000, but like my BMR is also 2000, I would say my goal is 2000 to 2200. Like that's kind of the calorie range that I would recommend. And same with protein, right? Like if my body weight times body weight in kilograms times 1.2 was 110 grams of protein, I would say anywhere north of 100 to 120. That's kind of the range that we're going for. So then we add this back up, and then what's left ultimately ends up being fat. So we know we have 1000 calories from carbs, and then we're going to do 120 grams of protein times 4 to give us 480 calories from protein. Add that to our 1000, that's 1480. So that leaves us, I actually need to do the math. Um, 2000 minus 1480. And again, this is hard without visuals, but that gives us about 520 calories are going to be from fat. That should roughly end up being about 30%. But we can always double check it. So 520 divided by 2000 is 0.26. So it's 26%, very close to 30, right? And again, that's calories from fat. So then fat actually carries a lot more calories per gram. So you're going to divide that number by 9. So it's a decimal, but it's about 58 grams of fat per day. And again, there's going to be a range with that. I would say, anywhere between 50 to 65 even is probably fine. So again, we're painting with broad strokes, and I always tell people too, see how that feels, right? Like if you are consistently struggling to meet certain metrics, then it's certainly worth, having a conversation with a professional and kind of getting it reevaluated. And, is this appropriate? Is this right? But there's also like again, we give ranges for a reason. You may be driving yourself nuts trying to hit something on the head that really isn't ever going to be that specific, but you also like it may just not be appropriate for what you're doing. Especially athletic, like it's really going to vary depending on, and like, and your body is going to vary some too. So I think it's worth kind of then having a conversation of like, okay, I did my best work. I either can't get there and I don't know why, or it may be just kind of finding other food sources that are going to help you meet those needs a little bit better. But it also just may be, well, maybe we need to adjust the goal. And I think, if it's, I feel fine, I'm just struggling in terms of getting there consistently, I think then like that's worth a conversation with somebody to say, hey, I need to like be thinking of other ideas. A lot of us kind of get stuck in a loop when it comes to food. And again, that's where a dietitian can be really helpful, because we're going to help you with that roadmap of like, okay, this is how you get there. Also, if you're struggling, like I can hit the numbers, but I don't feel good. I'm hungry. My lifts or my workouts don't feel great. Um, or I feel like I'm eating constantly and I feel overly full and bloated. Again, like talking that out with somebody who can then kind of like really take a deep dive into your situation and assess you can be really beneficial. And sometimes those are things that, I see that all the time in patients. I see it, I mean, they may come in for like 1 or 2 sessions and then they kind of like correct their ship and off they go. Sometimes it ends up being a much deeper discussion about like, do I even want to kind of track my intake this diligently and whatnot. Um, But hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that kind of helps you all kind of get a basis for how to kind of, break down these numbers. Again, if anybody has questions or you're kind of leaving this and your head is spinning, again, book a discovery call. If I'm able to like take your numbers and do this in 15 minutes, I will. If you're like, I can do the numbers, but I don't know like how to get there. That's probably a deeper discussion. But again, I'm happy to have it with you. So hopefully that is helpful to you all, at least get you started. Let me know, as always, if you have questions, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one.